Unfortunately, Cornelius was concerned that I had set aside too much time for him today. So we went over a little, and now I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about myself. So if you don't mind, I'll just share one of the reasons I'm so excited about the UMass program and teaching there is kind of selfish. Basically, I'm trying to offer people the course that I never got to have, right? All the years I spent in school and how I could graduate not knowing about cooperatives is a bit of a travesty. If you don't know me, I grew up in inner city DC and rural Appalachia. My parents were strongly committed to the civil rights movement. My father worked for the Civil Rights Commission. When I made the decision to go to college, it was to spur social change, right? I wanted to learn about community organizing. I wanted to learn about economic democracy, civil rights. And that I could graduate without learning about the Federation of Southern Cooperatives is particularly galling, particularly because I share a birth year with the Federation of Southern Co-ops. I'll let you think about that and the significance of that. But over time, I've had the amazing fortune, it's been almost a decade now, serving on the board of the National Cooperative Business Association with Cornelius and learning about their great history at the Federation. I had the opportunity as a consultant to work with some of their members working in pecans, and it was some of the most important work I feel like I've done in my life. You know, my career with Equal Exchange was in fair trade, and it was very clear to me that the domestic challenges that we have really are not that different from the international trade challenges. And working with the Federation made that more clear to me than ever. As you'll see from the packet, you know, Cornelius comes to this work with an amazing amount of experience and drive to ensure that people have the tools to have more control over their lives, whether that be black land retention, credit unions, worker cooperatives. You'll see from him that it's the driving force in his work. He's served on the boards of the Agricultural Health and Safety Council, the Southeast Climate Consortium, and the Presbyterian Committee on Self-Development of People. And as I mentioned, we've had the good fortune of working on the NCBA, National Cooperative Business Association board together for just about a decade. And it's been a privilege to work with him and to think about how our co-ops could be working more closely together to make a difference. You know, again, we've said this a few times, in this political environment, I think it's important to recognize it feels a little extreme, but it's not necessarily new. And it's important for us to recognize the tools we have for situations like this, particularly in the area of community organizing. And it's very important for us to recognize who our potential partners are out there that we could be rebuilding ties with, that we could be building new relationships with as we figure out how we are going to move forward in our mission of building a more sustainable and socially just world. So with that, it's my extreme honor to welcome Cornelius here as our keynote.
There's a lot of things since I've been in this work that have changed me. One, the latest thing happened about 2.5 years ago, and it changed the way I think about this work, the way I think about this country, the way I think about agriculture, the way I think about a lot of things. And about 2.5 years ago, on some work we were doing in Cleveland, there happened to be some phosphorus that ran off a farm into the river, into Lake Erie. And that phosphorus in that water, at just the right time, the sun came up. And that collision caused what they call the algae bloom, created a toxin in the water that shut down the whole city of Toledo, Ohio. over 500,000 of people. Our government, NRCS, was responsible for the cleanup of that. But it was phosphorus off one farm into the river with the sunlight that created a toxic environment. And it's not an isolation, but it changed the way I think about a lot of things. Since that incident happened in Toledo, Ohio, it happened in Florida, it happened in California, it happened in North Carolina, and about 6 months ago, it happened here in Massachusetts. And I think it's Lake Charles, about 90 miles down the road. That algae bloom happened there also. It's something that's common to us all. The common good, our air, our water, and our soil. And I always start off since those 2.5 years ago when that happened in Toledo, because it makes me think about the common good and how we're all connected about our air, water, and soil. And we all share responsibility for that air, water, and soil. And so I start off with that because I say it's not an isolated incident. It happens. It has been happening. And EPA said that it's a problem in all 50 states. There's phosphorus, and I think it's 123 lakes that we have, and in a third of them, there's phosphorus sitting in that water right now that's waiting for the perfect opportunity for that sun to hit it to cause this algae bloom. And that's scary. But again, it talks about the things that we all have in common and the things that we all must work on, because at the end of the day, no matter what you work on, some kind of way it's connected to the air, water, and soil. We have a lot of things in common, and I start with that. I start with that every time I talk. I start with that with my work. I start with that every day, just making sure that, hey, there's a lot that we in our communities, in our cities, in our states, in this country, in all these different regions that we have in common. And that's the air, water, and soil. And it takes all of us in our own ways to work on that. And so I start with that all the time, and I start with that here, but that's not why I'm here, so please forgive me. There's a couple of things I can promise you is that it won't take me long to say what I have to say. I'm a very simple person, and so I get through all of that. And two, I guarantee you that I will not meet your expectations of a keynote speaker. But it was beautiful to sit down there to see democracy at work, to see that one person and that one vote, and we don't realize how important that is. It was beautiful to be here again. I got here last night, and the first thing I did was I went outside in the snow, I played in it, and I snapped a picture and texted home to my kids. So, good morning. And let me start by thanking you, Urban, for the invitation to come here. And I've known Urban I know it's probably been about 15 years, I think. I think first at Equal Exchange and some work we did around watermelons, and Urban was around Equal Exchange at that time. You mentioned Southern Alternatives in terms of a consultant and working with one of our co-ops in Georgia. We serve on the NCBA board, and now with the Neighboring Food Co-op Association in terms of conversations we've been having about how we reconnect and continue to connect. Bonnie, thanks for working out a lot of details to make sure that I got here. And I'd like to thank the NCFA board. Again, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having me here. And thanks for allowing me the opportunity to play in that snow last night. Again, I apologize to you in advance. Again, I'm a very simple person. I always start out with a quote. A quote came from Malcolm X and said, I'm not a very educated man, nor am I expert in any particular field, but I am sincere. And my sincerity is my credentials. So I'm up here with that. Urban, I know you asked me to talk about the next half century of cooperation, and I will do that, but I'll do that in my own way, and you might not recognize it. I was in Charlotte maybe a month ago, and I was there with something called the National Rural Assembly. And the National Rural Assembly is an assembly of 50 funders and practitioners. They come together once a year, and they think about, it was called the Big Ideas Forum. And they think about, what's the big idea? They try to come up with one big idea that they all can rally around that changes the work that they do, changes the work in the region or wherever they are. That big idea they're in search of. And one of the things that they asked before we started the conference, the forum, they asked an open-ended question. And they said, what if? And they let everybody fill in the blanks of what if. And then they moved on. But that what if stayed with me. During that forum, I answered that, I filled in the blanks of that open-ended question, and I said, what if? What if the residents of communities own the asset base, the economic base, and the infrastructure of their communities? What if? What if the residents of communities own the economic base and the infrastructure of their communities? What if? So I come here today posing that question to you as part of this keynote and as part of talking about this next half century of cooperation. What if? What if? What if they own the farms, they own the land, they own the processing facilities, they own the grocery stores where you buy your food? What if? What if they truly owned the communities and all that was connected to it? We're talking about things, infrastructure owned by the people who use them and who benefit from them. What if? What if they were all connected? A system that they were all connected. The farms, the processing facilities, the grocery stores, all connected to each other. What if? Well, what if is possible, because what we're talking about are cooperatives. Organizations, businesses, economic bases with infrastructure that's owned by the people who use and benefit from them. What if? What if is definitely possible, because what we're talking about here are networks. We're talking about networks of these farms, these processing facilities, these grocery stores. We're talking about networks of cooperatives. What if? What if is definitely possible, because what we're talking about is cooperation among cooperatives. That sixth principle, cooperation among cooperatives. A network of cooperatives all working together. What if? So I pose that question to you. What if? How we complete that question, what if, should move all of us to some big idea. And it's going to take big ideas to get us through these uncertain times that we're talking about today, these uncertain times that are before us. It's going to take a big idea to bridge these divides. It's going to take a big idea, big ideas, to get us to work toward the common good that I started out talking to you about, our air, our water, and our soil. It's going to take a big idea to protect these things that we all have in common. Those things that we all share and that we must all work to protect. Our air, our water, and our soil. The common good. It's going to take big ideas, but big ideas are definitely possible. Big ideas start with one question, one simple question. What if? Big ideas. That's why you're here today. Here celebrating the 6th anniversary of the Neighboring Food Co-op Association. Big ideas are what birthed the Middlebury Manifesto. There was 4 great cooperators that asked, what if? And 51 years ago, back in 1966, a year before the Federation was organized, co-ops from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana came together to ask, what if? That simple question, what if, led to something big. Let me tell you about that big idea. Let me tell you about why I'm here, who I'm here representing. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. The Federation is simple, the way I put it. It's a nonprofit cooperative association of black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives all around the South. We were chartered to work in 17 southern states, including DC. We have board representation in 9 of those states, and members and networks throughout that. But our focus is on 8 states, from North Carolina all the way over to Texas. That's where we have the majority of our staff, our offices, and our programs, infrastructure. The Federation is also the only organization that has as its primary purpose the retention of black-owned land and the use of cooperatives as a self-help tool for economic development. There was 2 things that created there's 2 reasons that cut at the being of the Federation. One, and I use these statistics, in 1910, there were roughly 218,000 black farmers owning over 15 million acres of land. Before the turn of the century, around 1992, there were only 18,000 owning about 2.3 million acres of land. So that land had been disappearing, is disappearing. And one of our major focuses is to halt that reduction of land, of black-owned land, because they change hands and it doesn't go back to other farmers. And it goes to those things that don't play the role to help protect our air, our water, and soil. And it takes all of us, because phosphorus from one farm can pollute a lake, a river, a stream, and can cut down a whole city. We're all connected by the common good, by those things that we share in common: the air, the water, and the soil. And we must all work toward that together in our own ways. We're working in the South on that every day, but we have to create cooperatives as those tools to help maintain that land base. My friend Jessica Gordon Nimhart, in her book Collective Courage, she likes to talk about 3 periods in this country that was a big growth of cooperatives in the African American community. She talks about the late 1800s, right after the Civil War, when blacks weren't a part of the economic base, and they started creating burial societies, mutuals, and other kind of co-ops to survive. But then also in the 1930s, after the Great Depression, you had FDR created the Great Society, and there was these reclamation programs, and many of these communities started popping up, and they was cooperative communities in the 30s. And the community, there were all kind of reclamation projects and communities, but the ones that survived, things like Mileston, a cotton gin in Mississippi, Alberta, Alabama, where they created a sewing co-op, Freedom Quilting Bee. Those co-ops out of those 30 programs survived, and later on in the 60s were part of those co-ops in 66 that talked about what if we work together? What if we do something big? But it was those cooperative communities that survived. What was about those communities that the others didn't have to put them in a position to survive all those years? Then in the 1960s, that other period, the Civil Rights Movement, there was something called the War on Poverty. OEO, the Office of Economic Opportunity, another big idea. We're talking about 3 big ideas now. Big ideas that spawn something else. People coming together, people talking, cooperatives. In 66, again, the Office of Economic Opportunity, and then co-ops start forming out of that. And many of those co-ops came together. In 1966, co-ops from the 30s, from the 60s, 22 of them came together, traveled over to Atlanta, Georgia, with the help of some others. There was the International Association of Self-Help was in the room in 66 when they were talking. You had those folks from different programs, NCBA CLUSA. Somebody from CLUSA was in the room in 66 and helped put up the initial funding from OEO for those 22 co-ops to talk about a big idea. In the 60s, SCLC, NAACP, SNCC, CORE, all those civil rights organizations, all those civil rights workers, they walked around and they helped organize cooperatives as a tool to fight the economic exploitation and a lot of other issues that were going on during that time. But those co-ops came together to create what they called in 1967 the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And so for 50 years, from that birth, what we call the collision of the civil rights movement and the cooperative movement, the Federation is an offshoot of that collision, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And again, it was with the support of the Southern Regional Council, the International Association of Self-Help, CLUSA, and others. They wrote a proposal to the Ford Foundation to expand the cooperative movement around the South. A big idea, taking partnerships, taking people coming together, people thinking, people talking, people asking, what if? What if is definitely possible. So from that initial meeting in Mount Beulah, Mississippi, and those co-ops coming together, and those partnerships and those funding, and more co-ops coming together, and co-ops being organized as a necessity, out of necessity. Co-ops in Tennessee, folks who couldn't buy gas, who had to organize to purchase gas. Folks in Alabama who were kicked off their land, had to start sowing co-ops for a source of employment. Folks, sharecroppers in Alabama for registering to vote, kicked off their land, creating land buying co-ops. Co-ops sprang up all around the South out of necessity. They formed together out of necessity. And after asking one simple question, what if? For 50 years, the Federation has continued to focus on cooperative economic development, the retention of black-owned land, and advocacy. Dealing with advocacy, looking at programs and policies that further continue to exacerbate those problems we see. And so, Roger, when you talk about legislation and how important that is, it's definitely important. And what we have to do is talk more about it and talk together about it and start with what we have in common. Those things around air, water, and soil. The common good. What if? Much of our work has been and continues to be around co-op development, land retention, and advocacy. But we've also realized the importance of those urban communities because they too are affected by our actions, things we do, and we are affected by theirs. We're all in this boat together. We're all an intricate network, whether we realize it or not. We're all affected by that phosphorus that runs down into that river or that lake that pollutes our water, our air, and our soil. But what if? It's possible. So as we prepare to celebrate our 50th anniversary, we definitely invite you all, hope that you will come down, but also know that we're preparing for the next 50 years. We're preparing for that next century, for that next half century in terms of moving our work forward. We're honoring our past while building on our future. Our focus has been, and it continues to be, cooperative economic development, land retention, and advocacy. But I need you to know that this encompasses many things for us. This focus guides our work, but it also guides our networks. So our networks, with many of you in the room, many people around this country, but also internationally. I work around building institutions that are based on local control and ownership. Institutions and businesses, like our pecan processing facility down in South Georgia. Urban, you were able to connect with that. Southern Alternatives, where we had a capacity to crack and shell 20,000 pounds of pecans every hour. What if? Like our multifamily housing unit in Alabama, where we're not only saving family, but providing affordable housing, but people are doing this for themselves and owning the infrastructure, owning the housing that they live in. What if? What if is definitely possible. Like our health center that's 50 yards from the affordable housing. How do we connect health with housing and make people realize that it's about the whole community, it's about the whole person, it's about the whole network, it's about this whole country, it's about all of us working together. It's about all of us working together to protect those things that we have in common. What if? Like our federation that ties them all together. Our federation that uses a regional marketing system to aggregate and to market those products to other networks. Like our networks that support the work that we do, and that we hope we support them just as much as they support us. Like the networks of cooperatives all around this country, all over this world. So I ask again, what if? What if the residents of a community own the economic base and the infrastructure of their communities? What if? What if is definitely possible? What if co-ops all over the South and co-ops all over Massachusetts started working together and trading with one another? What if? What if it is definitely possible? What if a network of cooperatives from all over the South that was organized out of a big idea in 66, in 1967 chartering, the network is called the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and a network of food co-ops that are working toward a shared vision of a thriving cooperative economy that was started out of a big idea called the Middlebury Manifesto. That network is called the Neighboring Food Co-op Association. But what if? What if these networks began working together? What if? What if is definitely possible. Big ideas start with one simple question. What if? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope I was half as much as what you expected. I hope I think Urban said we're back on time now, so we can use a big portion of this to do a little question and answer if there's some questions. I understand there's also going to be a table, and I'll be at the table, I think. So for right now, I say if there's any questions.
Is this on?
Andy Grant, Franklin Community Co-op. Appreciate your talk very much. There's a phrase that's being used, and I think used rather loosely, food justice. And I wonder if that has resonance for you, and if you could tell us what it means to you, food justice.
Well, Andy, I'm going to, again, answer the way I know. So, yes, that phrase is used. But what I say is, and I start again with the question, what if? Because if folks own the economic base and the infrastructure, then there's no need for that question. Justice comes in the absence of ownership. You have to start seeking justice. But if folks own those things and have control over those things, then they have control over their lives, and you don't have to worry about justice. Justice plays out itself through cooperatives.
I'm wondering if this group of co-ops pooled their holiday pecan bulk purchases and were able to do something through Associated Buyers with the Federation of Southern Co-op Growers. If that could be a wonderful thing to have the best pecans grown in this country available to our consumers.
Well, definitely. Thank you for that question, because that's actually Urban and I have been talking about this for quite some time and been trying to chip at it little by little, and we think we're starting to make progress. And I heard the question asked earlier about CCMA. Well, talking about how many people are at CCMA, and if I'm not mistaken, you had some treats at CCMA and they had pecans on them, and those was pecans that we sent up just as a sample. To taste. So you had a taste of the Federation's pecans at CCMA. So our goal is to connect with NCF, with the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, to figure out how do we supply pecans to all of the food co-ops. And so that's something that we're definitely interested in, something that we're capable of doing. We have the capacity, like I just mentioned, and trying to figure out how to put it all together to make it work is what we've been talking about now for a little while, and what we're working hard with Urban on. And I'm sure we'll continue with the blessings of the board, and if that's something that you all are interested in, I think we can make it happen.
I'm part of an urban co-op in Providence, Urban Greens Food Co-op, and we're a startup, but we talk a lot about serving a lot of different immigrant and refugee communities that live in the neighborhoods. A lot of those folks are coming from much warmer climates, and so, you know, that means getting some of our produce that isn't local, that can't be grown local or can't be grown year-round local. And I mean, one of the opportunities I see there is just southern farms that are part of the southern cooperatives being able to source things like, you know, cassava that's then going to be coming from a lot closer than where it's coming from now, going to be a lot fresher, and connecting to those farms there. And I think, you know, I mean, we're not at that stage quite yet, but we will be by next year. But I'm sure there's a lot of other co-ops in the north where that kind of diversified product selection and being able to source it from, you know, small producers in the south would be really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And let me add to your comment. Yes, I agree with you. And again, I talked about, we have to understand this network that we're talking about, this network of cooperatives have to start in communities, in states, in regions, in the country, but also internationally. We would love in the South provide things that you can't provide during times you can't provide them here. I think that's the benefit of the diversity that we have around the table, whether it be climate, geographic, and all those things. And again, I started with the value I had for this snow. So it is important, and even at the Federation, we're looking beyond just what we do in the South. We're blessed with growing temperatures for the most part of the whole year, but we still don't cover the whole year. So we've been doing international work as well and trying to figure out how do we connect with small farmers and cooperatives around the world. I'm heading to Cuba Tuesday on some work we've been doing for about 16 years. We did a project with Jamaica around watermelon, because there's a few months out of the year we can't even grow the watermelon, but Jamaicans could. But they're connecting directly with those small farmers, with those cooperatives. So even in the need when we do have to source from other places, we're sourcing responsibly, we're sourcing through a network, we're sourcing starting with that question, what if?
My name is John Thomas, and I'm from the Hartford Startup, and I'm from a community where upwards of over 27% of the population in my neighborhood is unemployed, intergenerational poverty, and I call it social engineering of lack of access. Now, I identify with you. My mama was born in Quitman, Georgia, and pecans have been a part of my life. Matter of fact, we only go down there when they harvesting. So we bring these big old packages back, and you know, my aunts are like, "Bring me back some white dirt," you know, and they chew on the
sour dirt.
Yeah, they chew on the dirt. So I have a very strong Southern tie, but also being born in 66. I was born in 66, and the arc, you know, the timeline from then and when I was growing up and in school, we thought we were free. So We wasted a lot of time. And I'm talking about the narrative that you shared, because I'm a community organizer, a community engagement coordinator. And I just about got fired last night because I was writing some of the organizers of this co-op saying, if we don't get a steering committee in place now from this community, then you're just going to do the same old thing you know how to do, put the funds together, get something from outside brought into this community, and the residents will have no ownership of it. And I'm fighting tooth and nail, and I work for some lovely people, but at the end of the day, my goal is to get exactly what you expressed in What If. And I'm wondering how I leverage that narrative, not for the people I work for, they listen to me, but for the people that I'm working to bring these benefits to, because we have a strong Southern legacy, strong connection to the soil. And I'm wondering, I know that's the best way to engage people, but, sometimes some people just don't want to be helped too. So, those are the struggles I'm facing. I'm asking if I could get some help with that.
Yeah, and I'll say, my perspective on it is that I think everybody wants to be helped, but some people don't know how to be helped. And so what I would say to you is, one of the principles of cooperative is constant education. You just have to keep trying, keep going. We've been around for 50 years, but hey, we still have challenges too. And again, I marveled at this meeting when you said, because again, I saw democracy at work, but a lot of things you talked about, and one of the challenges as an association, you talked about how do you diversify from the membership where you don't become so dependent on the membership base. And I say to you also, be careful, because the other side of that coin is becoming dependent on something else, and it moves away from the membership base. And so we've had our share of struggles over 50 years, and you learn a lot. And so sometimes you think you're moving towards something good, and you're moving towards something that's not as good as where you were. So make sure that no matter how diversified you become, don't ever become dependent on something else beyond your membership, because you'll start moving beyond your membership. So, but to your question, exactly, again, I think constant education, I would say we would love to be a source of education, of exposure, and learn from you as well. We have our 50th annual meeting come up. I think it'd be good to come down there to connect with some folks, to hear some things, see, talk to other people. And the last thing I say to you, as you start talking to those folks, one thing you'll start finding out is that, like you're from Georgia, most of the folks from that community, I'm sure they have a connection to the South, just for how far you go back. And again, that has been one of the major problems for us as it relates to land retention, because many of the folks in these communities, they have family members who've moved all over the country, and they've forgotten about the land. And the land is being lost because of inability to pay the taxes, because not just knowing about them, and things like what they call heirs property. You probably have ownership in that land, and what you do or don't do also affects that land. And we have folks who are losing the land base because somebody in the North don't know about it, and they've been neglectful of certain things. So I think there's a lot of connections. I invite you to our annual meeting, which is in August. I invite you all to the annual meeting, and maybe we can sit down and exchange, and there's some things that we can be helpful on, and some things you may be able to help us on, and how we continue to build this network.
Hi, my name is Patrice Lockhart Anthony. I'm from Green Star Cooperative Market in Ithaca, New York. And in my work, in my business, and in the work I do in my role with the co-op, I use the language of resistance because that's the work that I do. It's the way I grew up. It's politics of today. And I'm wondering if you can riff a bit in the language of what if on using resistance for our forward movement in co-ops.
What does riff mean? I don't know. Well, let me say this to you, because again, well, for me, it still goes back to, so for me, it goes back still to that first question I asked with what if. What if the residents of a community own the economic base and the infrastructure of that community? I think that solves a lot of problems. It solves the gentleman's questions about justice. And it's that riff on resistance. You can resist when you own, when you're in control of something. And again, we talked about the whole platform, the whole strategy out of the civil rights movement was that conversion of civil rights and the cooperative movement. Because what they realized is that if you boycott something, you better have an alternative. And if you don't have an alternative, you can resist all you want, but you put yourself in a very vulnerable position. So again, ownership, control, cooperatives, for us has been our strategy for 50 years. It has been a strategy for resistance. It has been a strategy for land retention. It has been a strategy for self-help and economic development. So what if it's the same? What if the residents of a community, what if communities truly owned their communities? Then that's the form of resistance as far as I'm concerned.
Liz Blum, Hanover Co-op. I'm wondering if you, and thank you for your great talk and for keeping us up to date with the Federation. I'm wondering if you could talk about urban farming and if you're engaged in any urban farming and gardening, and if you're connected with groups that are working on voting rights and developing candidates to run for office.
All right, so I'm going to answer, and again in my own way, but I hope I answer your question. I started out talking about August 2014 and the situation that happened in Toledo, Ohio. I was familiar with that because we started a partnership with NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service, the agency that was responsible for the cleanup, and the Congresswoman in Ohio, Congresswoman Marsha Fudge, who's in Cleveland. And we started what they called the Urban Agriculture Project. For us, they came and asked us, could we help? Because when they started the project, in order to start urban agriculture, start any kind of agriculture, farming or whatever, you got to have some kind of resources. And so NRCS has been one of those agencies that provide many of the resources that help in agriculture, that also in terms of conservation. But our job was to go to Cleveland and to help folks get organized and understand the resources that were available to them through NRCS, but also what the ramifications of those resources had. And we started out with hoop houses, seasonal high tunnels, to build, to grow, to expand the growing season. So our work in urban areas has been around education, around outreach, in terms of making sure folks understand the resources available to them in order to start farming, and then also how to get organized so that not only do you own that hoop house, but you start owning the businesses, because there's not much you can do with one small plot. But if all the folks in the community start organizing and start getting together and creating a cooperative and start coming together, then there's more you can do. And so how to organize cooperatives. And so that's been our interaction in it in Cleveland, and now in 7 states in the South, we're also expanding that work. So a lot of our work is around outreach and education about the resources available, how to get organized in co-ops to make a bigger impact, and how you can retain that land base, that plot, or whatever it is. So still looking at land retention, and then creating those networks there in those urban communities, but also connecting them to farmers back in the South so they can supplement some of the things they're doing, and hopefully start the process of organizing some kind of co-op, including a food co-op. So that's the first part of that. And now the second part of your question, remind me of that again. The voting rights. The voting rights. And so thank you. And we had a chance to talk, and you talked about your work in SNCC back in the 60s. And that was a big part of our movement to start out with in terms of the folks who were organizing cooperatives and started the Federation. But unfortunately, in that process, and what I warned you about, is that we start diversifying. A lot of it because we had to, because we have a lot of limited resource growers and farmers and cooperatives, and our membership base is less than 1% of our total revenue. 75% of that is from programs, from various government programs. And so one thing that you will not do with government programs is registering people to vote. There's a book that came back in the 70s. One of the ordeals that the Federation went through was something called the Cotton Patch Conspiracy, the Sumter County Blues, when the senator, the judge, the local congressmen all came together, and they in a restaurant called the Cotton Patch, and they said that the Federation was using government dollars to register people to vote. How dare they? And it started an investigation that lasted for several years, in which they took every computer, every checkbook, every record, everything from the organization, and forced the Federation, all the staff, to move to the training center that they had purchased and work for years for free to continue that movement. And so when I say, what if you owned your own economic base and your own infrastructure, it's damn near the only way you're gonna survive when you start talking about resistance. And so, and voting, starting to register people to vote, all those things are very important. But again, the second part of my question was also that warning as you talk. You're 6 years old, and again, thank you for inviting me to this meeting, because it's great to see this democracy at work, and it's great to see those questions come. And again, for my piece, I just offer that warning and say, be very careful how you do it, because you will put yourself in a situation where you will be asking again, what if?
Thank you for your talk. My name is Jenny Silverman, and I'm on the board of the Dorchester Food Co-op, which is a neighborhood in Boston. And I was really struck by the comment that you made about that it was a proposal to the Ford Foundation that tried to sort of coordinate the development of co-ops across the South. And our co-op and many of the other startups in this room in New England that I'm aware of are starting in urban areas in the cities, more so than many of the rural co-ops that already exist or in the smaller places around New England. And I wondered if you were, so my what if question is, what if there was a concerted effort to coordinate the development of these co-ops in the cities? Because one of the issues in Dorchester is a lack of resources and trying to find resources to financially get this co-op off the ground. And I'm sure that issue, I know that issue faces other startups as well. So my question is there something that you're aware of, or should we be approaching something like the Ford Foundation to support this? And what if we had more coordination and support to start these co-ops and make them successful?
I do think there are resources out there. Many of them have changed, and I did mention that Ford Foundation was one of the foundations back in '66 again, who played a major role in terms of that's where the first proposal to pull the Federation together. That's where the first piece of where the first proposal went to. But Ford since then has long gotten out of the business around community development. So I think there are different players. You have to search. But also, I think that's the value of our organizations like NCBA, and that we sit down and start looking at those things that are needed to continue to protect, promote, and defend the cooperative movement as listed in the Constitution of NCBA. And so I think we have to think about those things and look within around our networks, and what if we started providing the answers to the questions that we have by working together closely and start asking that of NCBA and others. And I mentioned that so in the context of Rebecca and I had a chance to talk, and I know there's a challenge in terms of dealing with capital. And we're in the process of working with shared capital now, because we have needs as an organization as we start trying to move past our current business structure, as we start to diversify away from those government funders and being a lot more sustainable as an organization. But those shifts, those needs require capital also. So we're starting to talk within the cooperative movement. And some of the things that we're asking about, some of the financial vehicles that we're looking for, they don't exist. But we're starting to have conversations about how to create them. And so over the last probably close to a year, we've been in deep conversations back and forth, and we got, I think, 5 or 6 co-ops around the table now talking about how to build this vehicle that we need. So those are the things that I think we have to start thinking about when we say, what if? What if we all start working together and start satisfying our own needs? Because we have the answers within our cooperatives. That's what they are. I think cooperatives are the answer for many questions, for all questions. They have been for us for 50 years. They've been the source of survival, and I think they're the source of us continuing for the next 50 years. But we have to realize that. We have to understand that value, and more importantly, we have to sit down and get together where we can ask the question, what if?
Kay Litton, I'm from the Hanover Co-op. I'm a member there. And you and a coworker came to CCMA at the University of Massachusetts last June, and you presented a dilemma of trying as Southern farmers to expand your marketing area beyond the South. And I know that you spoke specifically of butter beans and okra and watermelon. And would we like to buy some? And if we would place orders, you would make sure you could get them up north to us. Have you made any progress in that marketing?
Yes. So I think there was Shirley Sherrod that was up there. And it was Cornelius Key from our Georgia office. But yes, that was the conversation. And so those butter beans, those squash, okra, all those things are things that we're doing. We've, over the years, and again, I mentioned equal exchange in relationship with Urban, going back probably 15, 20 years ago, we organized something within the Federation called SOCO, and it's Southern Cooperatives. It's our regional marketing system. And all it is a way for us to aggregate the products of our cooperatives all around the South. And what we started with as a pilot project back in 2002, I think, was around seedless watermelon. And we were growing, aggregating, and distributing those seedless watermelons to Massachusetts, through I think it was Red Tomato at the time, in the building with Equal Exchange. So we would send 50,000 pounds of watermelons every week. One truckload a day, I think. We were sending loads of watermelon to Equal Exchange's building that were being sent out to Bread and Circus, Harry Teeter's, I think, Harvey's, restaurants all around the Massachusetts area. So we have the capacity to do that. Our role as a federation is to do the aggregation, to do the education around it, because at that time we were starting with seedless watermelon. We were used to seeded watermelons, and seedless was something that was totally new for us, and we had to go through a year worth of education and trials. But that's also the value of our training center. We plotted an acre of those seedless watermelons out there, brought the university extension people in, and went back out to the farmers, to the co-ops, to make sure they understood how to do it. Then we started consolidating and looking at how do we make sure all of them are the same size. Y'all like the small watermelons up here. We like them big watermelons with the seeds in it. So it was an education for us. It was some outreach required. It was a lot of coordination. So yes, we've had that capacity, and we're just reorganizing SOCO, our regional marketing system, to do more beyond those watermelons now. So we're looking at leafy greens, we're looking at squash, we're looking at sweet potatoes. We're also looking at including the pecans in that as well. So yes, we could do that, and as a federation, we would make sure that the quantity is there and the quality is there, and we deliver what we say we're going to deliver.
So we've got one last question. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Cornelius. Based on where you live, I have a what-if question. What if Sonny Perdue, the former governor of Georgia, gets confirmed as the Secretary of Agriculture?
So, great question. So let me, and we've been asked that a lot. Let me tell you what I think, and based on what I know of Sonny Perdue, which is not a whole lot, it's just based on his record as the governor of Georgia. So before Sonny Perdue came in office, the Federation was a line item in the state budget around agriculture and around education around agriculture. When Sonny Perdue came into office, that was the first thing that was cut out of the state budget. Sonny Perdue came into office in Georgia around education, he was big on education and how he was going to fix the educational system. When Sonny Perdue left office in Georgia, we were, I think, last in education. But what Sonny Perdue did do was that he put a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources around the Port of Savannah. And the Port of Savannah became a signature card for the state of Georgia. So his work, his success has been around export and around big agriculture. And he's pretty much very similar. I was not surprised that President Trump tapped him as the Secretary of Agriculture, because he also came in bringing in businessmen to run the state government. So they have a lot in common. I think it's going to be about business. I think it's going to be about big ag. I think it's going to be about export. But we've also had the opportunity to send a question up for the confirmation hearing. And then we asked, what if small farmers can play in that export market as well, so that we can be a part of agriculture, so that we also play a role in protecting the air, water, and soil of this country. So that's what I know about him, again, based on his record in Georgia. We hope there are some changes, but either way, we have to be engaged, we have to be at the table, and we have to figure out how do we take our piece of it.